Good morning, everyone. We have received some calls and emails given the results of last night's election from people wondering about what's going to happen when Donald Trump becomes president and what people need to be afraid of or worried about, and if they need to be afraid or worried. So, we wanted to take a moment and just talk about 5 things that immigrants need to know regarding a Trump presidency. First of all, we can pretty much say, no, we're going to be saying goodbye to the deferred action programs. The biggest one of which is deferred action for childhood arrivals. This is a program that was put in place by President Obama in 2012 to protect certain undocumented folks who came when they were children to the United States from deportation. It also allowed them to get employment authorizations and, in many states, a driver's license. President Trump has said on multiple occasions that he plans to end that program. He also will not be continuing the program of deferred action for parental accountability, which is a program that President Obama announced in 2015 that has since been stopped because of a pending lawsuit. That program will likely go away and will not be revived, or the lawsuit will likely be dismissed in the courts. Another thing I wanted to talk about is that for people who are undocumented, you generally cannot be deported without a hearing in front of a judge. Generally, the only 2 occasions in which that can happen are A, if you've been previously deported and therefore are subject to something called reinstatement, or if you have been convicted of something called an aggravated felony, which are generally very serious offenses. Other than that, you almost always have a right to a hearing in front of an immigration judge. So, what that means is that if at some point you do encounter immigration and you are arrested, it is important to call a lawyer immediately to understand your rights regarding bond so that you might be released pending your case. And also to never ever sign a stipulated order of removal, which basically just says, I agree to be deported and I'm going to go ahead back to my home country. So, those are some things you need to know in that regard. Another thing is that we may be seeing a rise in deportations given the fact that the priorities memo that was issued by President Obama in 2015 will likely be rescinded. The priorities memo is a memorandum issued by the Department of Homeland Security per President Obama regarding certain people who should not be priorities for deportation. So they made a list of people who should be priorities, and if you didn't fall into that category, such as you'd been here for a long time and you didn't have any criminal history, those people generally were not at risk or much risk of facing deportation proceedings or deportation. Likely that memo will be withdrawn and replaced by potentially a new memorandum, and so we may be seeing a rise in deportation given Donald Trump's rhetoric about wanting to deport more people definitely than President Obama was seeking to deport. The other thing to remember is that there's only so much money to dedicate to immigration enforcement. So while Donald Trump may want to build a massive wall, from corner to corner, the entire border between U.S. and Mexico, there's likely not going to be money for that. And also, in terms of just deporting 11 million undocumented folks, again, both Congress and the executive branch are going to have to make choices about how to spend their resources, and there's just not an endless amount of money to engage in all of the immigration enforcement that Donald Trump would like to engage in. And then the last thing I'll say is just that besides those presidential programs such as deferred actions or some sort of prosecutorial discretion, as is the priorities memo, the laws that are in place regarding immigration are not something that can just be thrown out by the president. Those are things that have to go through the legislative process, which is run by Congress, so the House of Representatives and the Senate. And so while we do now have a Republican-controlled House and a Republican-controlled Senate, the vast majority of Americans, even Republicans, believe in immigration reform. And of course, some of that, on the Republican side involves securing borders further than they are. It also involves, putting into place some programs, some positive programs for people to be able to ultimately become permanent residents or citizens of the United States. And so I don't think all hope is lost in that regard. If you have any questions, feel free to give us a call at the office. And we hope that this has been helpful and informative as everyone sort of processes what the election results were and what it would be like to have President Trump in charge of enforcing our immigration laws.